there is a man standing in a public swimming pool in a burgundy suit. The water is up to his chest. His hair is flat against his forehead. He is holding a microphone, and he is delivering a live news broadcast with complete, unshakable professionalism. Nobody told him to stop. And that is the entire engine of what Will Ferrell built his career on. Except it is also not that simple, because Will Ferrell did not become one of the most bankable comedy stars of the last 30 years by accident. He did it by understanding something most performers spend entire careers failing to grasp. The joke is not the funny part. The commitment is. John William Ferrell was not chasing comedy as a kid. He grew up in Irvine, California, studied sports journalism at USC, and had a plan to become a broadcaster. The funny stuff was a side effect. He read the morning announcements in different voices. He made the room laugh. But the career path was conventional. What changed was a year with the Groundlings, the Los Angeles Improv troupe where careers like his either crystallize or dissolve, and what Ferrell figured out there, what the format forced him to figure out, was that the audience does not laugh at the joke. They laugh at the person who believes the joke is real. That is an improv principle. But Ferrell took it somewhere. Most improv performers do not. He stopped treating it as a technique. He made it the architecture of everything he did. He joined Saturday Night Live in 1995, arriving during one of the show's most precarious periods. The previous cast had been largely replaced. The writer's room was under pressure. Nobody was sure the show was going to survive the season. What Ferrell brought into that environment was a level of conviction the show had not seen in years. The Spartan cheerleader sketches, the Celebrity Jeopardy, appearances as a stone-faced Alex Trebek, the Robert Goulet impressions that went so far inside the character that Goulet himself reportedly could not explain what made them funny. The writers started writing for that level of conviction specifically, not for a type, not for a persona, for the fact that Ferrell would not blink. By the time he left, in 2002, he had spent 7 seasons, proving one thing over and over. If you believe it completely, the audience has no choice but to follow you. If this kind of behind-the-scenes storytelling is your thing, we genuinely love to have you along for the ride. We're working hard to build something special here, one video at a time. Subscribe if you'd like to help us keep going. Elf came out in 2003. The studio was uncertain. A 36-year-old man in tights, eating cotton balls soaked in syrup, wandering through Manhattan in full Christmas costume. It was not an obvious commercial proposition. The film made $228 million on a $33 million budget. What happened was not charm, it was not warmth, though both of those were present. What happened was that Ferrell played Buddy with zero awareness of how he appeared to other people. Every scene where a New Yorker was embarrassed by Buddy, Ferrell's face registered only love, or curiosity, or delight. The embarrassment had nowhere to land. It bounced back onto the world around him. That structural shift, moving the absurdity from the character to the situation, is what separates a performance that works from one that just tries hard. Buddy was not the joke. The cold, transactional world he walked through was the joke. And he refused to notice. Anchorman arrived the following year. Ron Burgundy is the role the industry uses to define Ferrell, and it is worth being precise about why it worked. Ron Burgundy is not a satire of news anchors. He is not a critique of male ego or 1970s broadcasting culture. Even though both are present, he is a man who has organized his entire identity around a belief that he is the most important person in every room and who pursues that belief with the focus of someone who has never once questioned it. The comedy comes from the gap between his certainty and reality. But Ferrell never plays the gap, he plays the certainty. Every time Ron Burgundy is humiliated, Ferrell recalibrates immediately. There is no crack. The facade is not a facade. It is the man. That is why the character still lands 20. Years later, satire dates. Certainty does not. The industry noticed, eventually, but drew the wrong conclusion. Studios spent the rest of the decade trying to replicate the Ferrell model by finding loud men, willing to be undignified on screen. The reasoning was that his films worked because they were outrageous. They worked because they were precise. Blades of Glory, Step Brothers, Talladega Nights, each one built around a character whose belief in himself was structurally unearned and, personally, absolute. Each one allowed Ferrell to locate the internal logic of that belief and execute it without apology. The scenes that do not work in those films are the ones where the screenplay asks Ferrell's character to be in on the joke, to grow, to reflect, to acknowledge his own absurdity. Those scenes go flat, not because Ferrell cannot do vulnerability, because they interrupt the commitment, and the commitment is the load-bearing wall. Ferrell has described this approach himself in surprisingly simple terms. In interviews, he has often said that the goal was never to be the funniest person in the scene. The goal was to make the character's reality feel complete, whether he was playing a news anchor, a race car driver, or a man convinced he was one of Santa's elves. The process remained largely the same. Find the internal logic, accept it completely, defend it at all costs. The laughter, in Ferrell's view, was usually a byproduct rather than the objective. There is one performance in Ferrell's filmography that almost nobody talks about, and it is the one that explains everything else. Stranger Than Fiction, 2006, a dramatic film in which Ferrell plays Harold Crick, an IRS auditor, who begins to hear a narrator's voice describing his life in real time. He is not doing comedy. He is not being loud. He is standing in a sparse apartment, eating the same food in the same order, walking the same route to work, and the camera watches him do it? Critics, at the time, compared it to what Punch Drunk Love had done for Adam Sandler, a serio-comic splinter of his usual persona, exposing something underneath the volume. The performance earned real critical praise. It sits at 73% on Rotten Tomatoes, with reviewers calling it, perhaps, his best work. One piece from Paste magazine later describes it as his equivalent of Jim Carrey in The Truman Show, a glimpse of a different second act that the industry never fully chased. What makes Stranger Than Fiction clarifying is that the underlying logic is identical to every comedy role Ferrell has ever played. Harold Crick believes in his routine the way Ron Burgundy believes in himself. The logic is the logic. Ferrell finds it and does not leave. Different key, same instrument. What Ferrell understood and what very few performers figure out at that level of scale is that an audience will follow you anywhere if they believe you are already there. The pool with the burgundy suit, the cotton balls soaked in syrup, the jazz flute solo, the Catalina wine mixer. None of it is funny on paper. All of it is funny on screen because he is not performing sincerity as a technique. He genuinely believes in the reality of the character, and the camera catches that. Commitment is not a comedy tool. It is a credibility engine. And Will Ferrell spent 30 years building one scene at a time, while most people assumed he was just being weird. He was also being very, very precise about it.